Hello, everyone. My name is Jao Ray. Someone was asking me about that. I have a phonetic pronunciation if it helps you. My name is Jao Ray. I'm a senior UX researcher at Dell. And this talk is about what bootcamps don't teach you about UX research. We just did the poll that most of you on the call are career switchers, which is great because a lot of the content is geared towards career switchers. As I've been mentoring on ADP list, I get a lot of the same questions from people. So I wanted to address a lot of these issues with the talk, focused on a broader audience. And then also for the students, here I might go over some things that you're not aware of are important. If these are the skills that you realize are important now, you have a little more time to start developing them. And for career switchers, these are the skills that you might already have, but don't realize it's super important to the UX field or being a researcher. You should start to recognize the importance of these skills and start building a portfolio or story around yourself and be a little more confident that you can actually be a great UX researcher. So a little bit about me. My undergraduate degree is in psychology. I did work in marketing before I got a graduate degree, basically in user experience. This talk is not about how you should go get a graduate degree. That's not the intent of this, because degree programs have a lot of the same issues as boot camps. During my program, I did 2 internships, one working for the city government, one working for a healthcare startup. And then I've been working at Dell for the last 2.5 years as a full-time researcher. And here's what I mean by schools and boot camps have a lot of the same issues. In schools and boot camps, you're more exposed to research methods. You learn about usability testing, you learn how to conduct interviews, you learn how to not ask leading questions, you learn how to conduct surveys, contextual inquiries, whatever card sorting is. Maybe you're engaged with affinity mapping and synthesis. That's the method, but then you're also exposed to all these new tools that are out there, user testing, user Zoom, Qualtrics, Optimal Workshop, and there's new tools coming out every year. These are what you're exposed to in your degree program or in a bootcamp program. I'm going to call all of these things research execution. It's about how you conduct research once you know what problem that you're going to solve. But what's missing is research communication, which I think of as the outer ring that helps you become a better researcher. And research communication really, and what you need to know as a researcher really is 3 parts. Making sure that the right research gets done, and then you're actually conducting the research and analyzing the data. This is the part that you learn from boot camps and graduate degree programs. And then you also have to make sure that your research is impact. These are the 2 pieces of communication that doesn't really come with an education. It really has to be built up from your experience working in the field or other fields. Doesn't have to be in UX field, but you have to kind of build those communication skills. And those are the skills that are super important once you actually have a UX job. And I'll go a little deep into that. So before research is even conducted, you might get a request as a researcher from one of your stakeholders like this. People are not buying things from a website. I think we should build an app. Can you go test this design? So a request is given to you to go do basically usability testing on a design that was already made. So based on this request, you might start planning, I got to do a usability study. I need this many users. I need this many tasks. This is how I'm going to measure things with scores and success rates and lostness and whatever. You're going to have to start planning. But are you doing the right research? This is the case where someone is telling you to go do usability study, and then you're basically about to do it. But if you take a closer look at the request, people are not buying things from a website. I think we should build an app. the underlying assumption is that if we build an app, then more people will be buying our products. Well, is that assumption valid? Where did that come from? Is it based on data somewhere else, or did the stakeholder just make it up in their head and decided that this is the way to go? Can you go test this design? Which basically is someone saying, I already decided on a solution before the problem was even fully identified, and I've come up with a design, and then I need you to prove that I'm right. In a lot of cases, you as a researcher, your responsibility is not to find out what's going on. You'll find yourselves in situations where different stakeholders want to do research just to have a rubber stamp on whatever they were already going to do. And as a researcher, as a good researcher, you kind of have to push back on that. And you can push back by looking at the actual problem that they're trying to solve. People are not buying things from our website. That's what the business cares about. The business cares about selling more things. They want more traffic, whatever. So as a researcher, you need to find out what is causing this issue. Is it because the checkout process sucks and people have a hard time checking out? Is it a lot of people are coming from mobile and they're having a hard time because the website is not mobile friendly? Is it because the things that the company is selling is really not attractive at all to people? Like all of those root causes for the problem would dictate that you would have a different solution. And you really need to, as a researcher, find out what's causing the issue before you can actually come up with a good solution that solves the problem. So in this case, you might be able to push back and say, do we already know that building an app would solve this problem? What happens if we build this app and then, I can, do the research and make the design better, but then we find out people are still not buying things from a website? Is the stakeholder willing to take that risk? This is where you can start to have that conversation, and then you're taking the stakeholder with you on really trying to solve the problem. And the common problems that you might get are basically largely fall in these two categories. The first one is sometimes referred to the more generative research. Who are the customers? How do they think? What motivates them? How can we improve something? Why did this thing happen? And it's about understanding people, the current experiences, and whatever the problems are. It's just about understanding. There's no solving problems here. And then another type of thing that you might do as a researcher is finding the right solution to the problem. So once you identify this is what's causing the problem, then you can figure out, are we building the right solution? Are we building the solution right? Are we taking the right approach? Do we need to implement this feature or this other feature? Do people understand this is the way this is intended to be used? Like those are more evaluative things because you already have a solution and then you're about to test it and trying to make the solution better. But you need to understand the people, the experiences that you're trying to build, the people that you're trying to solve problems for before you can find the right solution. Going back to the example that we had earlier, why aren't people buying stuff? There's multiple ways to explore the cause for that. You can look into analytics and as to are people even interested in the stuff that we sell? How many unique visitors do you even have to the website? You can look at how people are accessing the website. Are they coming from mobile? Are they coming from desktop? And where do people drop off in the purchasing process? And in analytics, you might be able to see that, there are a lot of people that are dropping off at the checkout stage, or people are just browsing. They never even get to the checkout stage. These are all the things that you can get from quantitative data without actually having to do any in-person research with any participants. But there's other types of issues that you can try and identify with research. And these are the questions such as, what do users come to the website to do? How do they make a purchase decision? So the users might come to the website just so they can compare prices, so they can buy the product somewhere cheaper, Or maybe they're coming to the website just to see what the company sells, and they find out that they're not interested in the stuff that you sell. How do users make a purchase decision? Is it when they find something that they like? Is it when they find something they like that's cheap? Do they have to have a good experience to come back and want to make a second purchase? What prompts the users to leave? Do they leave immediately when they can't find what they're looking for? Do they leave when they're having a hard time checking out? Do they leave when they have purchased from you once, but that was a bad experience? So they've decided that they're never going to come back. So all of these things would be on the more qualitative research side. But choosing the appropriate method kind of depends on what are the answers that you're looking for. Are you looking for these type of things, which would point you towards a more quantitative area, or are you looking for more qualitative things? What do users do? What do they want? Why do they do things? Then that'll point you to more qualitative areas. But as a researcher, you should be able to identify the appropriate method based on the type of questions you're trying to answer. So making sure the right research is done, it's really about managing stakeholder expectations. Um, a lot of stakeholders will come to you with solutions and assumptions and may not realize that. You as a researcher, it's your job to understand the real questions behind the request. You need to be able to reorient your stakeholders, convince them that the right research needs to be done if they want to get to the end result that they're looking for. And just because someone comes to you and says, hey, you need to do a usability test, doesn't mean you need to follow through on that. You're the researcher in this scenario, so you should be able to select the most appropriate method based on the questions that you're trying to investigate and what type of answers are you looking for. It should really be up to you to make sure the right research is done and then the right method is chosen for the type of research you want to conduct. So after the research has been conducted, I'm going to skip that part because supposedly that's what you would have learned from boot camps and degree programs, and you would learn how to analyze the data. You might go present your findings at some sort of meeting, remotely or in person, where you might present here all my findings, and you might get feedback like, it's a great job, it's really interesting findings. We didn't know our users were like this. We need to make these changes. But are changes actually happening, or is your presentation sitting in a presentation deck format, or it's a report sitting on someone's desk and it's not being reviewed or talked about, and nobody is really making any actual changes based on your recommendations and your findings? This is something you really want to make sure you are driving home as a researcher, is to actually see impact, because you don't want to be doing research, generating a report, doing research, generating a report, and you're in that cycle where you're not seeing the impact of your research. There are different types of insights which would require different types of communication. And here's an example based on the scenario that we had earlier. Let's say you conducted research and you found out that the reason that people are not buying stuff from the company is because they can't check their order status without an account. And it's very annoying to them. They experienced once and they don't want to deal with it again. Well, in this case, the user need is very specific. They want the ability to check the status of their order. They want to track the order. Maybe they even want to create an account after order placement. In this case, the solution is also very straightforward. You just got to make sure the customers actually receive the order confirmation email, making sure that the order updates are sent, and then you can create a new feature that allows account creation from order confirmation emails if the user opt in to check out as a guest, for example. Well, in this scenario, again, the solution is very straightforward. Everything is actionable by the product team. They can make sure the emails are sent. They can make sure they can create a new feature that allows account creation. And these solutions can be implemented relatively quickly. They can be prioritized with all the other features that has to be built. And, it'll go into development cycle as usual. This is very straightforward. So you're more likely to see impact and actual changes if you had this type of finding through your research. But there, you might have other types of findings. For example, users are overwhelmed by the emails sent by the company. Maybe they get, sales emails, marketing emails, surveys, NPS surveys, all of these emails that's sent by the same company, and the user is very annoyed with you as a company, and they don't want to buy stuff from you. Well, in this scenario, the user need is also kind of straightforward. The user only wants to get emails that's relevant to them. And in this case, relevant might mean it's actually related to the orders that they've placed, or it's discounts for the items that they specifically are interested in, or something else. You can, do additional research to figure out what relevance means in this case, but the solution will likely require coordination among different departments. So, marketing and sales and people that are doing surveys maybe needed to cut down on the number of emails, or maybe they should consolidate the information so they're sending one single email. There needs to be some sort of coordination there, and there might need to be consolidation of tools. Maybe one of the organizations is sending all these emails through MailChimp, and then another organization is sending out all these emails through another automated tool. And there's inconsistent look and feel, and the customers are not realizing that it is a legit request from this company. They just think of it as spam. So there might need to be a need to actually consolidate the tools that's used for sending these emails. And then there probably needs to be some sort of overall communication strategy across the company that need to be standardized. And there needs to be some type of guidelines on, when you reach out to the customer, it has to be under these circumstances. Nobody can be sending out emails to the customer willy-nilly just because they need something. Well, in this case, you'll see that a lot of times when you're trying to solve these problems, you might conflict with other teams' existing agenda. Marketing does not want to cut down on the number of emails that they send, and people that are sending surveys also think their surveys are really important and really need to know the NPS scores of the product or the company. So in this case, you need to get buy-in from all of these different teams that's potentially involved in this experience. And whenever needed, you might need to escalate that to your management, to your leader, or even a couple levels above that to actually get buy-in to actually want to address this problem. And a lot of times, this is a legacy problem. It has to do with how the teams were formed, what kind of responsibilities they've taken on over time, what they're tasked to do, maybe at the direction of some other leadership team. So these type of things would be harder to resolve. And it's not something that the product team can just make a feature and the whole problem will be solved. So if you really want your research to have impact, you have to be really strategic about how you communicate. You have to have the appropriate audience at the appropriate time. So if your research is relevant to your immediate product team, then talk to them at the right time. If your research is more appropriate to the broader team, not just your product team, then you need to find the appropriate time to bring that up. Maybe the company is not ready for like an email strategizing overhaul, but it's valid for a later strategic conversation, but now is not the time. Then you have to know to bring that up at some later point when the organization is ready for that change. You have to be ready for insights to conflict with someone else's agenda. How do you make sure that you are talking to the right people and talking at the right level in the organization to actually get buy-in? And then that kind of leads to the second point of how do you get people invested in what you're trying to say? Well, there's usually two things. There's the risk of not changing. We're already sending these emails, and the email open rates are very low. So maybe you're not even getting good responses anyway. And we're losing business. Like that's a big reason for these organizations within the company that are looking to side with you, because you're pointing out the risk. You can also point out what do they stand to gain. Maybe if we consolidate and have a more streamlined email experience for the customer, customers are more likely to open the emails and fill out a survey. And they would stand to gain because they will have better data that they would be looking for otherwise. And then throughout this whole process, you have to understand how people digest information. Some people digest information better if you just put all the text on the screen and they just want to read it. They don't want to go through a meeting with you or a presentation. But then there's other people that are more visual, and you need to provide the right type of information for the right type of people, and also the right level of information. If you're talking to your immediate product team, they most likely will care more about details. Who did you talk to? Who are these people? What do they do? Are they real customers? Are they potential customers? They would care more about, what do they actually do that led you to the data point or the insight? They would care more about the facts and the data. But if you're talking to folks at a higher level, maybe to your leadership or people that's outside of your immediate product team, they might care more about the actual insight. How does this affect the company? How does this affect the company's bottom line? Why should I even care? So you should provide the right level information for those type of people. Really adjust your content based on who you're talking to. And then you need to provide concrete paths to move forward. You don't want to leave people in complete uh, uh, you don't want to leave them feeling paralyzed, like I don't know what to do, everything is hopeless. You want to point out, we should do these type of things, whether it's having a consistent email strategy, or we should build this feature and take these steps to move forward. That way you can actually have people standing behind you and taking actions when the time is right. And you can really have different types of impact with research. There's more obvious tactical impacts that people think about, which is, I did this research and then this feature got improved as a result, or this design got improved as a result, or this product got improved as a result. But you can have more strategic impact within the organization as a researcher. You could drive product strategy and direction. If through research you found out that people are not buying stuff because nobody wants to buy your stuff, and you got to sell other things, then you're informing the direction and strategy of where the company should go. There might be different organizations that are kind of doing the same thing, but the experience is different to the user. So as a researcher, you can drive cross-product consistency, which would reduce duplicate work by designers or engineers trying to basically do the same thing, but in their own little bubble. If this was consistent, their work could be more efficient. They can just build the thing once and apply it everywhere. You could bring improvements in the employee experience. Support team doesn't have to deal with as many support calls on this one issue. They can focus their time doing something else. Sales team has a better time selling the product to the customer because your product is now easier to use. You can also increase the usability of UX in the organization. Maybe people didn't even understand what research can bring to the company, and they're like, we already know everything there is to know about the customer. Why do we need to do research? You can actually show this is the value of what UX can bring, not only just feature improvements, product improvements. We can also help with consistency and strategy and direction and all of those things. Then UX starts to gain more visibility, and then your work will be easier because you don't have to jump through as many hoops when you're trying to accomplish something. So, kind of tying it all back, making sure the right research is done, conducting research, analyzing data, making sure research is impact. You might already have these skills from other domains from your previous work. before you transition into UX that you don't even realize. Because communication is very translatable from one field to another. Like you're basically dealing with difficult stakeholders, you're bringing them along with you. So if you were in something like marketing research or analytics, business analytics, or maybe even a teacher, like a lot of these fields require dealing with stakeholders and bringing them along with you and listen to you, and understand that your approach is leading them to a better direction than whatever the assumed approach was. Making sure research has impact. You might have done other things in your previous jobs that um, where you try to bring impact and bring change based on some findings and information that you had. If you had experience doing that, then you already have kind of these two areas covered, and you might feel very new to the field. Like if you're just transitioning careers, you might feel like you don't know anything about research, you don't know anything about analyzing data. That's only a small part of being a researcher. There's all these other things about communication, again, skills that you might already have. You just need to start highlighting those, and make yourself a little more comfortable saying that you already have the skills of a researcher. It was just built from another field. Um, I want to emphasize this point that you're more than a bootcamp grad. A lot of people refer to themselves this way, I just finished this program or I just finished this other program. You really need to leverage and contextualize your previous experiences. Like everybody might hear that storytelling is a crucial skill in UX, but here you're telling a story about yourself, telling a story about how you've grown as a person, how your previous experiences and skills are relevant. And I'm already telling you, what pieces are relevant. If you can't really showcase that, you can't tell a good story about yourself. How do you expect someone to believe that you can tell a good story about, this very abstract product that you might not have a lot of experience with? Because you are the person that you've spent the most time with and you know the most intimately about. So focus on telling a good story about yourself and contextualize your previous experiences. And, I also want to emphasize, as you're trying to build that story about yourself, your portfolio is not about the things that you did. A lot of portfolios I see is basically, I did surveys and I did this and I did this and I did this. And they're trying to list out all the different research methods that they use, thinking that this is what will catch people's eyes. They know that I know how to do usability tests. They'll know that I've done carts. That's not the point of the portfolio. The portfolio is about showing your thinking as a researcher, how you approach problems. So this is a really rough structure. There was a problem, and this is what I did to identify the root cause of the problem. There's a process, there's a rationale, all the decisions that I made. Maybe the stakeholder came to me with this prompt, and then I was able to change that and direct the project to this other direction. Or, I had to choose this method to do because I was very constrained by time and budget. Like there has to be rationale for the decisions that you make as a researcher. And then, in this process, what are the challenges you face and how did you overcome them? Were you doing research in person and then the pandemic hit and then you have to shift things online? Did you have to deal with vulnerable populations and have to think about how to not inflict harm on them? Um, whatever, like any challenge you face. Those are the things that shows how you think as a researcher. What is your approach? And then, your results are not super important because your audience is not your project stakeholder. So it doesn't matter if you're saying, this button should be over here instead of over here because when it was over here, 5 out of 8 people can't find it. Like that doesn't matter as much. What matters more is what was your impact? Were you able to communicate this? Was actually adopted? Um, and again, impact can be the more tactical and more strategic. You know, the tactical impact could be the change was adopted, it was designed and it was implemented, or it could be more strategic impact. Like, I was able to course correct the stakeholders because they wanted to go down this path, but I pulled them back, and then we were able to focus on something that's actually important to the business. Or is it your impact that people didn't even understand what research was able to do, and then you were able to show this is the value of research, and now your stakeholders are more likely to collaborate with you, or they'll come to you with more questions because they've seen what you can do as a researcher. Those are all the impacts that you could talk about. And this structure actually fits if you have projects under NDA, because you're not talking about specific, you're not spending a lot of time to talk about the actual problem and the domain and the findings. You're spending the majority of the time talking about how'd you approach the problem? What was your process? What were the challenges? How did you overcome the challenges? What was your impact? We're spending a lot of time talking about those. So even if it's a project under NDA, you can still talk about your process. And that's what shows how you think as a researcher. That's the important part about portfolio projects. Thank you. That's all I wanted to talk to you about. Thank you to Nat, Maggie, and Caleb for helping me with this presentation. And I am going to open it up for questions. And let me just go through the chat.
Are we able to just ask questions, or should we put them in the chat?
You can ask questions. If since you're already off mute, I'm gonna read through the chat while you're doing that.
Okay. My question is based on something that I've heard from another colleague of mine who is currently a product designer. It seems that the sentiment is basically that it's more, or I guess, easier, for lack of a better term, to switch careers or transition to UX research if you already have a background in other types of research. Would you say that that is true? Like, if in terms of like getting interviews or getting jobs in general, is there a bias towards having an academic research background, or is it really just about the portfolio and resume?
It is about portfolio, but also it's about like the story that you can tell, right? Like if you've already done research, whether in an academic setting or in, a marketing research setting, it's all more obvious that you can do research, but that's focused on the middle part, the actually be able to conduct research. Like that's the skill that's being focused on. And that's what a lot of people pay attention to, especially for the more junior positions. Like they want to hire you to actually to be able to do work. Like that's not to say that there's some companies that are setting artificial gates that you have to have these qualifications before we'll hire you. Those are certain companies, their own practices. It doesn't apply to everyone. So don't worry too much about that. That's why I ask a lot about communication in this, because if you're only focused on, I'm so new to research, I've only done like 2 usability studies and I've done 1 interview from my bootcamp, and I don't feel comfortable, I don't feel ready about going out and saying that I'm a researcher. This talk is to tell you, like, you might have other skills in your previous life that is super relevant and super important, but you need to realize that it's important, and then tell a better story about yourself. So don't say, I just graduated from a boot camp in, August, and then I'm, taking more classes and reading more books. I'm going to be learning. Like that makes you sound very not confident. It sounds like you don't know what you're talking about. But if you frame story as, in my previous job, I have a lot of experience with handling difficult stakeholders, dealing with ambiguity, whatever the highlights are, and I know it could directly translate into a research role, then it sounds like you know what you're talking about. You sound more confident, and then, because imposter syndrome is a really big problem. And, for me, one of the good ways to overcome that is to know where you are actually good and how you're differentiated from another person. So if you talk about, I'm just a bootcamp grad, then people are going to ask, how are you different from all these other thousands of people that's also bootcamp grads? But if you're able to contextualize your experience and say, yes, I'm a bootcamp grad, but I also have all these other things. That's why I'm so great. That's why you should hire me. You then sound a lot more confident. Does that help?
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay. So some of the questions, do you find you need a master's degree to get into UX research? No. That's why there's so many boot camps out there, and there's free online resources, or Coursera and those type of things. Like I said, there might be some companies that's keeping an artificial gate, and saying like, oh, we're not going to hire you if you don't have a master's degree. That's bad hiring practice. That's not the norm. And I've talked to a lot of people who have had those bad experiences, and I wanted to share, like, that's definitely not a requirement. What's more important is your ability to think as a researcher, your ability to approach problems, your ability to communicate, your ability to select the right methods, and learn on the job. Like, those are the more important things. Um, so you don't need a master's degree to get into youth research. You don't even need a boot camp to get in there, because if you think about it, a lot of people in this field that have, maybe 10 years of experience or more, they didn't have a boot camp back then. They didn't have a master's degree back then. How do they get in? Like, you just have to build up experience in this field with projects. You have to actually practice. How should you display a project on a portfolio if it's under NDA? I already went over this. With that structure, your emphasis is more on the process and your how you think as a researcher, and less about the project itself. So you can just blur over the NDA parts or gloss over or whatever, but the emphasis is on, this is the problem, this is how I approached it, this is my impact. When stakeholders didn't realize we need research, how do you usually persuade them? This might be an issue if the organization itself is not is super new to research. So, or the organization thinks that they already know everything there is to know about the customer. And I actually went through a situation like this myself in the previous team I was working on. These people are like, we've been working on this product for 30 years. We know the customers. But if you actually pay attention to the customers that they're talking to, they're interacting with, those are the big customers that are paying us a lot of money, and they have a lot of say in what gets made, and their needs are prioritized because they pay us a lot of money. But I went to actually find data on who our customers are, and those customers that the team talks to on a regular basis only represent like 5% of all the customers, because they're the big customers that buy a lot of stuff from us. But what about like the 95% of everybody else who doesn't need the fancy features? They're just trying to onboard, and they have a hard time because it's really hard to understand if you haven't been with the product for the last 30 years. Then, this is me trying to look for existing data to basically bring to them, hey, these are the people that you've been talking to. It's very biased. I'm not saying that you don't understand the customer, but you're understanding this very small percentage of the customer. Let me do research on these other people and see what they need and how we can make it better. And you can also tie it to business objectives. We're not just trying to sell more things to existing customers. We're trying to attract new customers as well. How do you attract new customers? You can't attract new customers if you have a really difficult to use product that's really hard to onboard, and you have to basically take a class on how to use it. Like, that might be the model 30 years ago, but that's not the model now. Customers expect, usability. They expect to be able to use it once they have it. So those are some of the things I actually had to deal with myself. But there's basically convincing stakeholders to research might require you to, find information about who they think the customers are, what are their assumptions, and basically find data that contradicts it. Sometimes you might not need permission to do research. If you don't have access to the end customers, maybe you can talk to support and ask them, what are the issues that you've been seeing? Like, what are the calls that you've been getting? And then they say, I get a lot of customer complaining about this and this and this. And then you can tie it to cost, because support calls cost the company money. So you can say, if we don't address this issue, we're going to keep getting support calls on this one thing. If we just were able to fix it, support can spend their time on something else. And, that is a reduction in cost. Again, bringing it to the business language that people might understand. And then you might be able to convince them better, okay, now do research, figure out how we can actually make it better. So there's that. How do I stand out as a junior researcher if I'm having trouble landing interviews? Tell a good story about yourself. You might not be transitioning from another field, but if you are, definitely leverage your experience from previous fields. If you're um, if you are a student trying to, you're graduating and then getting into UX, that is, think about if you have any hobbies or passions or anything like that. Like, you have to stand out as an interviewee, regardless of who you are. So find some unique points about yourself that you can highlight. Basically, avoid saying my name is so and so and I'm a UX researcher. Like, saying something different, more unique about yourself, whether about your previous experiences or passions or some other thing that kind of defines you, about who you are, but also you can make a connection about how that thing is going to make you a better researcher. And maybe I should get an example. I've talked to someone I met, at the ADP list mentoring sessions, who was a dancer who lost his job because of pandemic, and then they're taking boot camp. Well, like, that seems very not researchy. But if you think about a performer and how they're able to they're basically creating experiences for people, and they have to understand their audience. They have to connect with the audience. Like, when you start to talk in that language, it starts to click for people why it's relevant. But you have to be the person that's bringing it up. You can't expect the interviewer to spend extra time with you just to figure out why the hell would a dancer want to be a UX researcher. You have to be the one that's bringing it up and saying, I don't know, I love creating experiences for people. I love connecting with people. I have a lot of empathy. Those are the things I can bring from my previous job to this, and that's what makes me a better researcher. That's what makes me stand out. Like, you really have to tell a good story about that. Um, what specific aspects should we consider when we build our portfolio within bootcamp projects for a solid portfolio? Same thing in that list that I gave. What was the problem? What was your approach? What was the impact? Like, if you can talk about that, those are the things that you're going to get questions on if you're going to do a portfolio review anyway. They're going to ask you, why did you do a survey and not a usability testing? Or why did you do this first and not this other thing first? You have to answer these questions anyway. So if you can tell a good story about the project, and your approach, your thinking, that makes a solid portfolio. How do you recommend framing outcomes if the changes didn't or haven't shipped? Testing shows that 9 out of 10 users were able to complete this task, but these updates haven't been launched. Impacts could also be, the changes were adopted into design. That's one level of impact. It could also be that you know before this testing, people are like, why do we even do research? Research is completely pointless. But now they've seen this, they've changed their minds. That's also an impact. So that kind of goes back to the tactical and strategic impacts that I had on one of my slides. That's talking about what type of impacts you could talk about. It doesn't have to be anything that's shipped already or launched, because if you're during a bootcamp program or a degree program, you might not be able to follow the project through to see what happens, but you know what happened along the way. Like maybe you influence a stakeholder, maybe you change the project direction, maybe research uncovered something that the company has never thought about before. Like those could all be impacts, and the impacts doesn't necessarily have to be like this thing was actually being this thing was actually made. um, how important is to have design skills if you're most interested in research? um, it's not super important, but it's a plus. And I say that not to say that everybody has to go learn design. um, I say that because design helps you communicate. So, like I talked about how important communication skills are, if you are able to visualize your thinking and say, this is the workflow that we observed people have. These are the concepts that are important about this people, and this is how these concepts overlap. Like if you can visualize things or even make very, very low fidelity prototypes, this was the problem and this is roughly what the workflow is. So I think the design has to be something like this. You just have to have really rough workflows, but design skills help you make those things easier to understand, easier to interpret. So when you can help people understand what you're talking about, that's where your design skills come in. Unless you're like a designer and a researcher, so like you're also making the wireframes and prototypes and stuff, like it's not super important. Those roles would be in really small companies. But if you're in a larger company where there's more of a delineation of what researcher does and what designer does, it's not super important, but it's a nice to have skill. Um, have some experience with research academically, but not professionally. Is there a good way to highlight in a portfolio or resume? If you're doing like academic research, like if you have a PhD or something, that's a little different, because you might already be trained to speak in very academic terms, and your method section is the whole page or anything like that. So you have to kind of step out of the research paper format and then think about what was the problem that we wanted to investigate, what was the issues, basically that same structure, and see, maybe the professor or the lead investigator had some idea and then you were able to find a new direction or whatever with your research. Like those type of things are, I don't want to say universal, but they apply across different types of projects. So if you can talk about that, it helps people understand what your academic research is about. Because when you're super academic, unless it's people with a lot of training, they can't understand what you're saying when you're starting to say big words and a lot of those things. But that also depends on the company. Like if the company specifically are looking for people with PhDs, then there's a certain level of expectation. Um, that I hope that helps. What do you think about ad hoc personas in case we don't have the resources for monetized research? Ad hoc personas need to be based on data. So I don't know what you mean specifically about ad hoc personas. Like if you're making a persona, it needs to be based on real data. It can be imagined. Like I imagine that Karen that lives in the suburbs has 2 kids and a car and does this. Like that doesn't make any that doesn't help with anything. Doesn't help people make decisions. If the persona is, I'm trying to think of an example, people that read news that only read the headlines, that don't read the actual news. That's a type of people, because you're categorizing people based on behavior. And that behavior is something that is observed, either from previous research or something that you know people do. So then you can categorize people into people that read the headlines, then people that read the whole article, people that are uh, that refuses to buy from Amazon for some reason, and then people that um, that was a bad example. um, but basically, even the personas have to be based on data. How would you react if your boss asked you to work on the research within 2 weeks to find out the persona and business model? Is that even possible? Probably not. One, I have a colleague who's working on personas for us, and she's been working on that for 2 years. And because, well, one, there's a lot of different people, a lot of different types of personas that we're trying to identify, and then each there you have to do recruiting, you have to interview people, you have to go really deep to actually build personas from there, and then you have to actually build the personas. Like, I don't think it's done in weeks. Like, usually it takes 2 weeks to recruit that many people, so probably not realistic. And this is where you kind of have to have conversations and setting expectations about, this is what actually needs to happen, this is the outcome that you can expect. If you really only have 2 weeks, then you got to say, like, okay, this is the output that I am able to deliver. Like, because you only gave me this much time and no money, I can only give you this. Are you comfortable with this? If you are, then don't judge me like a crappy-ish persona. If you're not comfortable with this, then give me more time or give me more money, and I can do a better job at it. Are there any courses, specific boot camps that you recommend specializing in UX research? Rosenfeld Media has a lot of good books on research. There's books on surveys, there's book on conducting interviews, there's books on like, how do you empathize with people. They have a lot of good books on UX research specifically, but those are the more, the actual execution part of the research. If you want to work on those, you can go find those resources online. But again, this talk is not about how to feel inferior because you don't know how to do all of those things. It's about leveraging all your previous experiences and making sure that you can tell a good story about yourself. Rosenfeld Media, not Medium. Yep, Maggie sent a link, and they have a community called Advancing Research Community. They have talks every month. You can also go through Jared Spool has a community called Leaders of Awesomeness. He also talks about UX strategy in every week in that community, and they're all free. You just have to sign up and register. Are there better ways to convey soft skills such as empathy, active listening, presentation, etc. through a portfolio? Yes, it's about how you tell the story. So, if you're talking about, let's say you're dealing with vulnerable populations, and you're trying to reach out to low-income people or people that speak a different language, or people that had some sort of trauma, and those are the people that you're talking to, you can show empathy about in how you approach the problem, how you approach these people, how do you make sure they're not traumatized, again, by you asking those questions. Active listening, that is a little hard to show because active listening would show through how much information you were able to capture based on what the participants were saying. Are you able to listening for beyond the opinions, but beyond the opinions and go deeper into their motivations or behavior patterns or kind of what drives them? You kind of have to listen a layer over and get over the opinions. Presentation, it's not through your portfolio. Presentation skills would be shown if you're actually giving a portfolio presentation at an interview. So you should be able to tell the story, bring the interviewers along with you, and show that this is how I was able to approach the problems. Here's how I solved the problem, yada, yada. So like, that's not something that you show through the portfolio. That's something that's evaluated when you're actually being interviewed. What do we prepare research for a design system product? What kind of research can we do? I'm not sure what exactly what you mean, but if you're building an internal design system, you can just interview the people, the employees internally who will be consumers of the design system. So the designers, the researchers, the developers, the front-end developers, all of those people, and understand what they need and what their expectations are and why they have those expectations, what their use cases are. Like, you can do internal research on that. Tips for beginner UX students portfolio. Make sure like you follow that structure I laid out. Talk about the problem, the process, your thinking, and your impact. Specific type of job as blend of UX research and some UI design. Yes, if a lot of the smaller organizations or organizations that are newer to research will have some kind of hybrid jobs that allows you to do design and research. They're not super specific, usually about their requirements, so you kind of have to like look for them. How would you recommend develop research skills with passion projects as a beginner? This is something you actually need a mentor for. So you can, like, let's say you have a passion project, that's like, trying to give an example. National Grid has very, very terrible user experiences. They separate out their gas account and your electricity account. This is speaking from real experience. Let's say you're doing a passion project on that. You can try to see, okay, this is the issue I'm trying to investigate. Why does it suck? Or, how do other people feel about it? You can interview some people and then you can see what you get out of that. But then bringing that project to someone else, maybe with a little more experience, possibly on ADP list. There's all these people that are willing to mentor and help, and see how they would have done it differently. They might say, okay, you could have sent out a survey here because you're trying to get this type of answer from people. Or they might say that you're likely going to hit some internal blocks because the company was structured this way. So this is something that you probably can't change. You have to think about another thing. But if you reach out to people and trying to get feedback on how they would do it differently, that's most likely how you learn. You have to practice it and get feedback, and then get better. Right? I think that's all the questions. We're 3 minutes over 6, so thank you so much. I appreciate you guys listening and asking all these questions. I'll send out the recording if you have any questions. If you want to schedule individual session with me on ADP list, feel free to do that. Thank you guys. Have a good rest of your day.